Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next Business Network event. Really pleased to have so many people in the room today. I'm really pleased to have so many people online as well. This has proved to be a really interesting title, and I think that's been justified in the number of people that are interested and that have signed on. So in a moment, I'll be handing over to Professor David Falzani, MBE, who's a Professor of Practice in Sustainable Wealth Creation here at the university. My name is Paul Rice. I'm the Business Engagement Manager, so my role is to give you the welcome and then get out of David's way and let him tell you what you're really here to find out about. In terms of the venue this evening, there is no fire drill planned. So if a fire drill does happen, the emergency exit routes are to my right, your left. The event staff here will help you get through that if that does happen. All I would say is just make sure you can keep up with me. I'll be running really quickly. If you're ahead of me, you'll be safe. To help us with questions and answers at the end of this session, we have an app that we use called Slido.com, particularly for those people that are joining us online. If you have any questions that you would like to ask David, then this Slido link is open for the duration of the session. The code 4186010, if you'd like to download Slido.com or go to the website and key in that code. When we do open the floor up to questions, we can take any questions from the floor, and I will then ask any questions that have been submitted online. Please make sure you put the right number in. I can't guarantee if you get the wrong number, the kind of answers that you're going to get. So, without further ado, I'd like to just give a little bit of an introduction to Professor Falzani. He is a business consultant, entrepreneur, and professor with extensive executive and strategic business development experiences. He started his career at IBM and then attended Wharton School. He worked in consulting with a variety of clients, including BAE, Marks and Spencer's, and 3i, and supported merger and acquisition transactions totaling over £11 billion. He's been a trainer for innovation and growth programs, and he was appointed to the Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor in 2011, and then honorary professor in 2013, becoming Professor of Practice in 2019. David was made a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in 2017 for services to enterprise and engineering. And I'd like to invite David to the stage to talk to us about pricing. David.
Wow. Wow, fantastic. Thank you so very much, Paul. Superb. Well, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. So a very warm welcome to you all in the theatre, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us online as well. So we're going to talk about pricing. So fantastic. Well, let's jump straight in. On the screen, you can see what looks like a slightly oversized Rubik's Cube. And on there, you can see on the left-hand side 2 arrows pointing to 2 squares. Both the squares are sort of a brown colour. Are those 2 squares that are highlighted by the arrows, are they the same colour? Do they look like they're the same colour? I've got lots of people shaking their heads in the audience. So what I'll do, just to help you a little bit, is I'll get rid of the background. So on the right-hand side now, what I've taken out that background there. Do the ones on the right-hand side look like they are the same colour? They do. Lots of people are saying they do. Okay, maybe you think, maybe they're not the same pictures. Maybe David has done a bit of Photoshop here, or maybe they've been adjusted somehow. So what I'll do is on the left-hand side here, I'll screen off the background in stages. So have a look at the 2 brown squares on the left-hand image, particularly look at the bottom one, and at some point it might change for you. So are the colours the same on the left-hand side now? Do they look the same? They do, don't they? Absolutely. Let me just bring back the original image as well. So why are we looking at this when we're talking about pricing? Because this is an optical illusion, of course. If you look on the right-hand side there, it's the background colour around those 2 squares that make the squares look like they're a different colour, even though they're identical, as we can see on the left-hand side. And so true also for pricing. So this is a metaphor for much of pricing. Human beings are not independently calibrated as to what constitutes value. whether something is expensive or cheap. So instead, what do we do as human beings? Well, we look for reference points. So we use the context, we use framework, we use the background, we use prior experiences. So think about this metaphor, this idea that the background of pricing is really the fabric that's used to recognize value and whether it's high and low and so on. So thank you very much, Paul, for that introduction. So I am David Falzani. I've had a varied career, but essentially I spent the last 25 years or so building businesses. So I've started businesses of my own, I've co-founded businesses, I've worked as a consultant to help others do that. I've mentored and supported other people in similar ways. And I've been very fortunate because I've actually been engaged with training. And I've trained over 700 high-growth businesses through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 program at Oxford Said Business School, Oxford University, and over 1,000 scientist entrepreneurs through various programs at the Royal Academy of Engineering. So I've had this great opportunity to train and also mentor and engage with all of these businesses. And so there's a couple of things that I'd noticed over that 25 years. And one of the things I noticed was chronic underpricing, particularly for small and medium enterprises or small and medium businesses, chronic underpricing. And for me, underpricing is the number one error I see when I work with and help early stage businesses. Now, what's the reason for that? Well, I think there's a reason for chronic underpricing. There's some cognitive bias there, there's emotional baggage, but I think it comes down to three basic things. Firstly, a lack of confidence, real confidence in the value proposition. What's the value proposition? So that's the thing that the company does, and they do it, and the customers value it so much they're willing to pay money for it. And hopefully the value proposition is in some way different and possibly superior to competitors as well. So that lack of confidence is one of the reasons that people underprice. The other one is fear of not having enough sales to basically, pay the overheads, to make payroll that month, or maybe to meet the rent, and also some associated belief that if we keep our pricing low, we're more likely to get business in, so we can pay our bills. So there's a fear element there as well. And the third reason is the irregular setting of prices. And when I say irregular, I mean both in terms of not being done often enough. So some people do price once every 3 or 4 years. I think it's something that should be done quarterly or even monthly. And also the method that's used, an irregular method, a method that doesn't really recognize the value of pricing. So if that's the reasons for it, what can we do about it? So I noticed this problem. That's why I wrote the book, Double Your Price. And I also came up with this challenge about 10 years ago. So it was a purposefully provocative challenge. Can you test? So this is my audience of businesses. I said, is there a test or an experiment you can run in the market to see what happens if you actually double your price? Now, to my delight, some companies actually did this, and many have done it over the last 10 years. I remember one company in particular. They were a video production company based here in Nottingham, and they've been growing steadily across the Midlands. But they wanted to move into the London market, so they made a decision that they would double all of their prices for any new business engagement in London. And to their surprise, it made no difference to their conversion rate. So their doubling of the price still gave them the same conversion rate between leads and sales. But of course, what it did do was it increased their profits 8-fold or 10-fold. And that enabled them to grow, reinvest, and become a much bigger and more successful enterprise. What they discovered was that previously they'd been chronically underpricing, and they'd really been appealing to, I'm going to be slightly uncharitable and call them bottom-feeding customers. So people perhaps were very price-sensitive, price-shopping customers. And the more premium customers ignored them because if they were cheap, they were seen as being no good. So by doubling their price, they essentially moved up the value ladder. Yes, of course, they lost the really price-sensitive customers, but they gained access to far more premium customers who they could now engage with. So they doubled their price in London. They didn't immediately double all their other prices, but they moved them up progressively over the following few years because they found that they had been chronically underpricing. So that was the rationale for the book and for and many of the lessons I had over that period of time. So we're going to cover a very brief introduction to pricing. We're going to talk about why price is so important. Then we're going to get to that important question, which many of you, I'm sure, are really interested in, is how should you set your price? We'll then be a little bit more imaginative and start to rethink pricing and look at some of the more avant-garde aspects about how prices are set by companies today. We'll look at some reference points, and then we'll wrap that all up. So an introduction to pricing. So what do we think we know about pricing? What do people generally think they know? Well, often people think, oh, well, pricing, okay, it's one of the 4 Ps of marketing. Okay, so there's lots of other things to think about as well. It's just one of the 4 Ps. Price should be set relative to costs, people say. Okay, well, we're going to review this as well. We're going to review each of these. People are rational and considered decision makers. Are they? Okay. Product value is largely derived from functionality. So what your product does is really important. Okay, we'll see. And lastly, business analysis and theory can provide the answers we need as business leaders to grow our businesses. So we're going to review each of these during the course of the presentation. So a very brief review then of traditional pricing. So most forms in business rely on one of these 2 approaches. So cost plus pricing, where there's a cost and there's a markup applied to it. And I'll talk more about cost plus in a few slides' time. But there are problems associated with this. Costs are backwards looking, aren't they? You know what your costs were last year, but price is forward looking. So are the costs correct? Are they still correct? Do they change? If you're a growing business, are they still correct as you grow with volume? Competition-based pricing. Now, this can also have some issues and problems associated with it. Not least, if you're pegging your pricing to your competitors, then are you communicating, are you broadcasting or signaling that you're basically the same as your competitor? You're a me too. But much more fundamentally than that, how do you know how the competitors set their price? What's the fundamentals behind that price point? And are they valid or not? So the assumptions behind both of these methodologies can be very problematic. And I'll talk more about both of these shortly. But before we do that, before we look at how we should set price, let's review why price is so terribly important. So I'm going to ask you a really unfair question. I know it's an unfair question, but please bear with me. There are 2 companies. There's company A and company B. Now, company A has a price of 100. Company B has a higher price. The price is 130. Now, company A, 60% of its leads convert to sales. Company B, only perhaps because of that higher price, only 40% of leads convert to sales. So the unfair question, which is the more profitable company, A or B? And how much more profitable do you think it might be? And again, taking into account sort of average sort of national margins for gross margin and operating expenses and so on. Just have a little think. Do you think it's company A or do you think it's company B? And normally when I do this with an audience, most people go for company A. But of course the answer is not only is company B more profitable, but it's twice as profitable as company A. And there's a little mini P&L on the slide there, and you can also get it in the book or off the website from the book. But trust me, all the assumptions are fairly standard, average margins and so on. But you don't have to take my word for this, because Harvard Business Review did a fantastic piece of research, and they looked at 2,500 companies across many, many sectors. And they asked and answered the following questions. If we make a 1% improvement in price, or variable cost, or volume, or fixed cost, what effect does it have on operating profit across all of these 2,500 companies? And what they found was actually price by far and away is the biggest lever. And on average, a 1% increase in price produces an 11% increase in profit. That's a huge lever, isn't it? So price has this enormous effect on profit. What's also interesting about these 4 different metrics is the third one there, volume. What's another word that we use in business parlance for volume? What's an everyday term we use when we think about business? We don't call volume volume. What do we call it? Anything else? Business we bring in. Yeah, it's revenue. We call it revenue or we call it sales. So what this research from Harvard Business Review says is basically a 1% increase in price has almost 4 times the influence on profit compared to a 1% improvement in sales. And yet where do we tend to put most of our attention? Mostly on sales and revenue growth, isn't it? Rather than on price. So a really, really important result. And I would challenge all of you to work out what does a 1% improvement in your business produce? Because each business has a different structure of their P&L. And in the book, there's an exercise to do that. I think it's also on the website as well. But you should very, very much know the answer for your own businesses. Now, as well as HBR, McKinsey did a similar study. They looked at 130 distributors. And they worked out that a 1% change in price increased EBITDA, let's call it profit, by 22%. So a huge effect on profitability. So the lesson from this really is this great leverage. Price is just this huge lever to influence profits. Now, why does all of that matter? Well, it matters because, of course, we know that cash is king, don't we? We know if we want to grow businesses, we need to be cash generative, we need to manage our cash. But ultimately, cash is derived from profits. And, we can think of our high growth business as being almost like a bank with an internal rate of return or an interest rate. And a successful SME probably has an internal rate of return of 25%, it might be 40%, it might be 50%. What that means is for every pound or dollar you reinvest back into your business successfully, you get that annual compound interest rate. Now, wouldn't you like a bank account that gives you a 40 or 50% annual compound interest rate? Yeah, people are nodding, absolutely, of course we would. Now, of course, there's not without risk within your SME, but nonetheless, this idea that if we can generate higher profits, then we can derive from that more cash, we can reinvest that back into our business. Now, company A and B here demonstrates this. If you look at those different trajectories on the screen, you can see company A here towards the bottom. So company A has got a lower price, it's therefore less profitable, less cash generative, and the owners take out those excesses through dividends. Company B has a much higher price, generates a much better margin, it generates more cash, and they reinvest that back into the business. And because of that compound growth that you get, just like a bank account, because of that compound growth, you get that much more of a hockey stick effect. And even after 10 years, you can see the enormously different outcomes between those two businesses. So the idea, and what I'm really proposing, is this idea that we can be more profitable, we can generate more cash, that we can reinvest that now into our staff, better training, they can be better rewarded. And I found that generally staff working for companies with nice fat margins tend to be more engaged and happier. We can also reinvest that back into better products and better services. And then guess what? We can then sell those to our customers for a better price. So there's a virtuous circle here where we can build. So it's all about this. So for me, double your price is all this idea about, well, it's all about reinvestment. It's about giving you the financial surplus you need to reinvest back in your business to get that virtuous circle really working hard for you so you can get those wonderful hockey stick growth rates. Okay, all right, so that's why price is so important. So let's get to the next topic, which is all about, well, okay, price is important, we understand that, but how should we now set price? I'm going to start with a thought experiment. So the £1 million widget thought experiment. So let's say that we've created a product, I'll call it a widget or a gadget, and it creates £1 million of value for our customer. Now, how does it do that? Well, maybe it produces, on average, £1 million of cost savings for the customer. Or maybe it helps the customer create more sales, and from those sales, they get £1 million of extra profit. It doesn't really matter. It creates £1 million of extra value for the customer. And that's represented here on the right-hand side with the cherry pie or apple pie of value. So that's £1 million there we've created. Now, there are no competitors. Fantastic. There are no substitutes. Marvelous. So how much should we price this widget? How would you price the widget if you had this scenario in front of you? Well, let's say that for every customer they get £1 million net. Yeah, how would you price it? What proportion of that pie? So if that pie represents £1 million, how big should your slice be? You're selling them the widget. Well, let's say it's for 1 year. Half of that. So someone's saying £500,000. That's a really nice answer. It's a kind of split the difference or meet in the middle kind of strategy. So someone's saying the very efficient market approach of, well, maybe we should charge 999,999 pence because in our rational world, there's still 1 cent or 1 pence of value for the customer. They would still buy it. Okay, but we know that there are emotional loadings here. There's transaction costs maybe as well. But I applaud your spirit, your entrepreneurial spirit. So okay, all right, let's add some more information to this now. So I like the 500,000 split down the middle, very good. Okay, let's add some more information. So now the widget, there's the cost of supply, production cost or cost of supply for us is £1,000. Now how much should we charge the customer? Nothing's changed, has it? It should be exactly the same. And yet I see so many businesses today using cost-plus pricing. So what does that mean? Well, cost-plus pricing, we would take the cost, so we've said it's £1,000. We'll apply a markup, let's be generous and say it's 100%. So we have a price now of £2,000 here. The customer's extremely happy, aren't they? They're getting £998,000 of value. The problem is, will you go out of business when you're only charging £2,000? And I see that so often. Whereas value-based pricing, we would take a proportion of the value that's being generated. That's how value-based pricing operates. You calculate the value you're generating for your customer, and then you take a portion of that, a slice of the pie, if you like, as your price. So 50% is a laudable number. 25% is more in line with the norms, 15 to 25%. So here we've got £1 million of value that we've generated. We've done that analysis. We can take 25% of that, and so we can charge a price of 250,000. So essentially, we've created this pie of £1 million through our products, our services, and we take a slice that's a quarter of that as our price. That's the slice we take, and then the customer gets the remaining portion. The other really nice, well, let me get on to the next point. Okay, all right, so that's the widget thought experiment. So how should you set your price? Question that I asked earlier. And there are many, many, many different pricing approaches, many different strategies, many different tactics. But generally, businesses tend to use one of three. They use cost-plus pricing, they use competitor-based pricing, or they use customer value-based pricing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into each of those in a little bit more detail. So first of all, cost-plus pricing. Now, I'm going to call this bad. I'm going to say this is something that was used 300 years ago. It's very, very old. I'm not sure how appropriate it is today. I would say probably virtually no businesses today should use this methodology as their main approach. And yet I know lots and lots of businesses do. So how does it work? Well, we calculate our total costs. Let's say that they're £100,000. We then say, well, we made 1,000 units, or we delivered 1,000 sets of service over that time. So we divide one by the other. So our supply cost, therefore, is £100, and then we apply a markup to that. So let's say it's 60%. So the price is £160. So why don't I like cost-plus pricing? What's missing from this picture? Which important element of business is missing? The customer. It's an entirely introspective exercise, isn't it, cost-plus? People like cost-plus because they say, well, I can measure my costs. I can measure these things. I have these things within my reporting system. Okay, but it completely ignores the customer perspective. You know, who's your customer? What's valuable to them? What preferences are there? How are you making the lives better for your customer? What are the dynamics of your customer's decision-making landscape? All of those are completely ignored, aren't they, by cost-plus? It's entirely introspective. So I really don't like cost-plus. Competitor-based pricing, I'm going to call that better. It's much better than cost-plus. So on the right-hand side here, you can see a scattergram here. It's where on the vertical axis here, we have price. And then horizontally, we've got perceived performance. Notice that first word, perceived. And this is a really great exercise that everyone should be doing. So you should do this for your own companies. You should look at the competitive landscape and try to place on this map where you are and where you believe your competitors are from the perspective of your customers. So price performance. So it's a medium technique. I think it's a much better technique. And you can use the positioning of your bubble, your product, compared to your competitors to signal relative performance value characteristics to the market and to customers. However, there's a bit of a problem sometimes. Some companies see this and think, wow, okay, so if we undercut our competitors by 5%, our product or service is just as good as theirs, so customers will see us and give us loads of business because we're just as good and we're 5% cheaper. The problem with that is what customers hear. They hear something quite different. What the customer hears and says is this: the best offering is only 5% more expensive. Why cut corners? Let's just spend the extra 5% and get the best. Meanwhile, the company that did the 5% discount, how much have they reduced their profits by on average? We saw the answer earlier. 5%, a massive 55% reduction. Yeah, remember, it's 11% for every 1% change in price. So the 5% discount reduces their profits by 55%. I do wonder when I see businesses habitually just giving discounts all the time, do they really understand the effect it's having on their bottom line and their ability to, again, generate the excesses which they can then reinvest in that virtuous circle? So competitor-based pricing, and then thirdly, value-based pricing. And I'm going to call that the best technique. And it really is much like the widget experiment. So what we do with value-based pricing is that we look at our customer and we calculate the value that's being generated for them by our product or our service. And generally that tends to be because of cost savings that we produce or because of increased profits, because of maybe due to excess or extra sales. So in B2B, this is something which is very, very doable. It's very easy to do to assess that. And typically, the norms, as I mentioned earlier, is that if you calculate the size of the total pie that you've generated through your product or your service, you take how big is your slice? You normally take 15 to 25% of that number as the price. So that's how big your slice is, and the customer gets the rest. Those tend to be the norms. So value-based pricing, really powerful technique, very customer-centric, and I've over the last 25 years, I found that businesses that understand their customer the best tend to be the most successful. So this is all about understanding your customer, isn't it? About their decision-making landscape, how do they make trade-offs, so on and so forth. It also has a second important role to play, which is if you do this analysis, you're now able, perhaps for the first time, to explain to your customer or potential customer why they should buy from you. Because you can now explain to them what advantages, what economic advantages there are if they now engage with you as a supplier. So it's a really useful sales exercise to do as well, because it gives you those insights that you can use in your marketing communication, your sales messaging and so on. All right, good. All right, so we've talked about that. So let's now, so I said we're going to talk a little bit more kind of imaginatively about rethinking pricing and try to reset maybe some of your expectations, some of your maybe some emotional baggage or some sort of myths around pricing. So I talked about the pricing scattergram, didn't I, earlier on, where you have this vertical axis with price and then horizontally perceived performance, different to actual performance, perceived performance. And what you generally see is that there tends to be this kind of characteristic on there. So there's this arrow. It doesn't have to be 45 degrees, but generally the trade-off is the more performance you want, the more you have to pay. So it moves up and across this chart. What's really interesting, though, is that when you look at many categories, so for example, soaps, if you look at the soap category and do this analysis, and you can come up with a scattergram, and I've done this, and I do this in the book as well, is that actually all of those products are identical. What do I mean? I mean, if you look at the active ingredients of all of those products in that category, they're actually the same. They're the same ingredients. They have the same functionality. The differences might be the color, the packaging, the branding, the price point, certainly different, but otherwise they're identical. Same thing for cosmetics. And again, I've done the analysis. You look at you look at the ingredients, the makeup of them all, pardon the pun. You look at what constitutes them, and they're actually the same, but being sold at vastly different price points, vastly different, despite being functionally the same. Again, the packaging's different, the branding, the messages, so the communication bundle of messages that goes out with them, and of course the price point, which has an important role. Clothing. I started one of the first internet clothing companies back in 1999 in Italy, doing men's apparel. And our suits and clothing were made in the same factories, by the same workers, on the same machine, with the same fabrics as the so-called designer brands. The only difference was the tiny label in their products that had the designer name on it. Otherwise, they were identical, despite the hugely different price points. Painkillers also very similar as well. Let's look at an example of this. And enormous price differences, as you can see there, between the highest and the lowest. So let's look at one of my favorite examples, which is table water. So I went to my local supermarket, I looked at all the different types of still table water available, and I worked out the cost per unit, or the price per litre, if you prefer. Perceived performance here, I kind of guessed, kind of made it up, but I put them all on the chart. What's the active ingredient of water? It's water, which is what? What is a water molecule? H2O, thank you. So water is H2O, which is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom bound together in a molecule. So Between the cheapest and the most expensive water here, where there's a ratio of 600% in unit price, is the H2O molecule different? No, by definition, it has to be exactly the same, doesn't it? So from a hydration point of view, and if that's the reason that people buy water, interesting question, from a hydration point of view, all of these products are exactly the same. They all have the same molecule in them. The difference, again, is the packaging, the branding, the messages associated with them, and, of course, the price points. 600% difference in the price ratio. And again, I've done this, I do it in the book with paracetamol. I look at 500 milligram paracetamol. It's the same 500 grams. It's all medical grade paracetamol being sold at 4 or 5 times the price between the cheapest and the most expensive. Washing powder, table salt, crisps, so on and so forth. I've looked at all of those. So it's a really interesting characteristic. So, again, ask yourself, well, how rational are you being when you look at these products, all these different price points? It's a really interesting question. We'll do a little bit more on cognitive bias now, talk about priming bias. So I've got another question for you. Oops, excuse me. Another question for you. I love to ask questions. So this is from Andrew Kahneman from Thinking Fast and Slow. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I'm hearing 10s, I'm hearing 5s. What's the number that your brain is screaming out at you at the back of your head? What's the number that most of you are? A lot of you are hearing 10, aren't you? 10 is the number that's... So when I do this with audiences, typically 3/4 to 90% of the audience say, well, the answer is 10 cents. But of course, the answer is 5 cents, isn't it? So this is a really great example of priming. And what's happening here is that your brain, your system 1, so system 1 and system 2, the two sort of mechanisms that Andrew Kahneman recognized in his analysis. System 1 is the fast decision-making part of the brain. It's the primordial part. And it makes most of our decisions, despite system 2 thinking it's in control. System 2 is the conscious part. System 1 sees the $1.10, and it sees $1. It knows the difference is 10 cents, and it starts screaming to your system 2 that it's 10 cents, it's 10 cents, it's 10 cents. Of course, if we really sit down and think about it, the answer is 5 cents. So think about how priming might be apparent in your businesses. That could be in a good way, or it could be in a bad way. You could be underselling yourself as well. I want to look at one other example of priming bias, because it's such an important and strong. So who do you prefer, John or Mark? John is intelligent, impulsive, critical. Mark is jealous, stubborn, critical. Who do you prefer, John or Mark? Who do you prefer as a friend, John or Mark? Everyone prefers John. And yet they're identical, aren't they? John and Mark are identical. The only difference is the order in which the descriptions, basically we've reversed the order for Mark. So there's no weighting here. All of these are equally the same magnitude. But priming bias is incredibly powerful. And what priming bias says is this. It says what comes first matters most. So think about in your own businesses, do you take advantage of priming bias? Do you think about how you stage and order the messages you use in sales for what your customers would prefer to hear? And have you segmented that and changed that order for different types of customer? Because I can guarantee they're not homogeneous and they'll have different preferences. So priming bias is a really important way of demonstrating and communicating value from a marketing comms point of view. Really powerful bias. So basically, and I'll show you one more. So behavioral heuristics and biases. So this is decreasing sensitivity bias. And we like to think ourselves as being rational. We like to think that people are rational. However, we look on the right-hand side here. A person is far more likely to walk 10 minutes to save $10 on a $25 item than they are to walk the same 10 minutes to save the same $10 on a $700 item. Does everyone agree with that? So much, much more likely to do this on the right-hand side than on the left-hand side. And yet that's totally irrational, isn't it? It's the same 10 minutes, it's the same amount of effort, it's the same $10 reward for doing it. And yet, it's decreasing sensitivity bias because of the proportions of the money's involved. We're far less likely to do this on the left compared to the right. So again, irrational behavior and decisions being made every day by consumers many, many times a second. Price is often also a messenger as well. So without any other information being available, Would you rather live in a £250,000 house or a £500,000 house? Would you rather drive a £10,000 car or a £50,000 car? Let's increase the stakes. Would you rather fly in a plane with a pilot earning $100,000 a year or $25,000 a year? Even better, would you rather be operated on by a surgeon earning $80,000 or $400,000? Now, I'm sure almost all of you have a very clear picture and you choose the higher number. But ask yourself why. What is it about these questions that directs you? What underlying assumptions are there that are directing your preference? Also think about this from your business perspective as well. If you are undercutting competitors, if you are underpricing, what message does that give your customers and prospective customers, given that this is such a strong influence here? Price is such a strong messenger. So this is price as a messenger without any additional information. Let's now add some additional information in there and see what happens. Okay, this is a great piece of research done out of Caltech and Stanford, and it was about wine tasting, blind wine tasting. So the subjects who were doing the tasting, they were told there were 4 wines, wine A, B, C, and D. Now, unknown to the subjects, wine A and B were actually the same wine, and wines C and D were the same wine. So actually there are only 2 wines here. But what they were told is that wine A was a $5 bottle of wine. And they were asked to say, well, how much did you like it? Give it a score of how much you enjoy it. How good does it taste? How much do you like it? So you can see the liking score there is about 2 and a bit. Then they were given the same wine, but they were told it's wine B, and it's $45 a bottle. It's the same wine. But you can see now the liking score, so how much they enjoyed it, has doubled. Similarly for the other 2 wines. So for wine C, they were told it's a $10 wine, and please give a liking score for that. And again, it's 2 and a bit, isn't it? And then they were given wine D, which unknown to them was the same wine. They were told it was $90 a bottle. And you can see again, the score of how much they enjoyed it, how good it tasted to them, has doubled. So the only difference here is the price that they were told the wine cost. So A and B, same wine, twice the score when the price was higher. C and D, same wine, score twice as high when the price was higher. So we've now introduced more information. So there's pricing information, but they also have the information from their taste buds. They're tasting these wines, and yet it's all overridden by that pricing information. Now, interestingly, if we take away the pricing information, so this was the same test, slightly different with new audience. They were told the 4 wines A, B, C, and D. You can see that A and B here have got roughly the same score. There's no pricing information here. And you'd expect that, because A and B are, in fact, the same wine. And the same here with C and D, roughly the same score. And they are, as you'd expect. So the result on the left-hand side here is entirely down to those price points. So pricing is such an important and interesting dynamic. Now, this research, really interesting, had another step. The wine tasting actually happened within a functional MRI machine. Now, MRI machine, an incredible piece of technology. How many lives across the globe have been, beneficiaries of the MRI technology? A fantastic technology. Invented where? University of Nottingham, very, very close by to this building. So this was a functional MRI. And what they did is that during the tasting, they basically scanned the brains of the subjects, and they particularly looked at the reward centers or the pleasure centers of the brain and looked for heightened activity there whilst the tasting was being carried out. Now, we've already established that when they were told that it was a higher price point, even for the same wine, they said that it tasted better to them. But what's interesting is the actual physiological aspect and actually measuring the brain response. So on the top chart here, you can see the electrical activity in those parts of the brain for the $45 and the $5 wine. And again, this was the same wine. But when they were told it was $45, you can see a much more stimulated level in those parts of the brain. The other one was even more marked. So here, the $90 wine and the $10 wine, you can see that the reward, the physiological or the physical reward they're receiving is much higher when they were told the wine was $90 rather than when it was $10, even though it was the same wine. Now this is an incredible result, isn't it? Because now we're saying that, okay, we know people might not be rational, but now it seems that they're actually not just saying it tastes better, but they're actually receiving more physical reward when they're told that the same product is at a higher price. What's the corollary of that? What's one of the implications? One of the implications is that, particularly for consumers, but also in B2B, because human beings are still involved, it means that basically price equals value, full stop, period. That's the implication, isn't it? Really interesting result. I'll move on because I know we don't have a huge amount of time. So do people choose on value? Sorry, people do choose on value, not based on value for money. How can I demonstrate this statement? People choose based on value, not value for money. Well, let's do a little experiment. Let's say that there's a choice of 3 laptops. So there's a laptop which is $300, there's one that's $1,000, and there's one that's $3,000. Okay, all right, so which offers the best value for money? Well, I don't know, but maybe we could come up with some criteria of what constitutes a good laptop or what features we want, try to rank them. So, okay, we need to do word processing, we want to do email, maybe we want to watch movies, we want a nice screen, maybe we want a good battery life or a weight. That's probably more telling for the higher end laptops, isn't it? So we can come up with some criteria, we can score it, the exact numbers don't really matter. But then having done this, we can now put them on a chart. So we can see the performance metrics here of these 3 different laptops. But which one is the best value for money? Well, this doesn't necessarily give us the answer. But what does is if we look at the change in the scores between one to the next. So going from no laptop here to the $400 laptop. So no laptop, we can't do any of those things, can we? So if we get the $400 laptop, suddenly we've got an increase in score of 22. So going from 0 to 22, it's an increase of 22. If we go from the $400 to the $1,000 laptop, the change in score is 3. And if we go from the $1,000 to the $3,000, the change in score is an additional 2. So now, which is the best value for money? It's the $400, isn't it? It's absolutely obvious. And yet, if this is true, what's the leading laptop brand, biggest market share in the UK today? Yeah, it's going to be the MacBook, it's going to be an Apple product. Same thing for smartphones, for mobile phones. What's the biggest market share smartphone in the UK today? It's the iPhone, isn't it? And yet that's the most expensive product in the market. If this was true, if people really did choose based on value for money, then the cheap discount, good value for money products would dominate from a market share point of view. They'd be the most popular choices, but they're not. So research shows that most people aren't really able to judge value for money, despite believing they can, despite thinking they can. And so fundamentally, they don't choose the products that offer the most bangs per buck in a sort of objective sort of sense. Instead, they choose the most personally rewarding option that they have at a price that they can afford. So this is a really enormous implication for business. So let me just say that again. So they choose the most personally rewarding option at a price that they can afford. So this is really important, not just for B2B, but also for B2C. And I know that value-based pricing, calculating the pie can be tricky for B2C businesses, but you can certainly do this for B2C. So for all business leaders, for all of us, this means that the challenge for us is to find out what does value mean to our customer, particularly if you're a B2C business. Because as I say, you can look at your customers, you can look at the pricing that they can afford, and then you think, okay, now how do I frame the most reward for them at that price? So people choose on value, not value for money. Now, so what does value mean to your customer? And it's not always about price, or it's not primarily about price. So this was a piece of research from McKinsey. They looked at customers of 130 B2B distributors and asked them to rank why they chose those suppliers and what was important to them. So number 1 was range of products. Number 2 was product availability. Number 3, customer service, and then sales rep relationship, and then same or next day delivery. And then pricing was only the 6th biggest reason why people choose. And yet, if we hadn't seen this, we asked ourselves, well, how do people choose a distributor? We probably think, well, pricing must be 1 or 2. Actually, it's only number 6. So the challenge is for you to establish this for your own products. Okay, a couple of more slides and then we'll wrap up. So reference points. So tactical reference points are used by business all the time in how we execute different business strategies. So small, £1.80, medium, £2, large, £2.20. Where do we see this? In the high street, we see coffee shops would be a good example, wouldn't it? So the way it works is you're walking along the street and you think, I'd quite like a coffee. So you go to the shop and you look at the menu and you think, well, I can have a coffee for £1.80. But then something strange happens. You look across and think, well, hang on, I can have a coffee that's twice as big, a coffee the size of a bucket for £2. And you think, hang on, for another 20 pence, I can have a coffee that's twice as big again, about the size of a small car. Okay, so what's the most popular coffee size? What do most people actually buy, if you look at all the data? Yeah, the one in the middle, well done. Medium followed by large. So the question is, why does small exist? And why does small exist butted up so closely, pushed up so closely to medium and large? What is there is a form of anchoring. So the anchor of £1.80 for small is there basically to encourage you to buy medium or large. So anchoring is a really powerful way of manipulating reference points. And generally, as I said right at the beginning with the Rubik's Cube, customers often define alternatives as gains or losses compared to some sort of reference point. We are not, as human beings, as I said, independently calibrated to understand what is value or value for money. So past experience can be important, knowledge of alternatives, what happened last week, what alternatives, different competitors and so on. So really important to think about this idea. And for your own business, you can think about, well, how can you affect your customers' reference points? To what extent can you do that to help direct them to the correct choice? So reference points, that Rubik's Cube example right at the front end, really, really powerful. I want to look at a couple of more examples. This is from Dan Airley at Duke University. He looked at Economist magazine. He looked at their US pricing. And The Economist at that time had web-only subscription, so online, for $59. Or you could have web plus print subscription for $125. So print, you get the web access, but you also get it delivered to your house, the print copy as well. And with his subjects, he did a survey to see who would buy what, and he found that 68% of the people would buy web only, and 32% would buy the web plus print. So if we take a weighted average of that, the average spend is about $80, isn't it? Okay, so now he did something really interesting. He introduced a third price point. So as well as the web only and the web plus print, he put one in the middle there, which is a print only subscription for $125. And you think, well, surely that's redundant. Who would choose $125 when you can get web plus print for $125? So this central one here, what business does that have on there? Surely no one would ever choose it. Okay, so he ran the trial again and asked people which one would they choose. And what he found was now only 16% went for the web-only subscription. And luckily, no one went for the middle choice. Okay, that's good. Okay, but 84% went for the web plus print. So it went from 32% here to 84%. That's a huge swing, isn't it? And from an average price point of view, now the weighted average is $114. So it's gone up by 30%. So average price or average transaction value is increased by 30%. You can imagine the influence that would have on your bottom line. So what is this all about? So this is called decoy pricing. And what decoy pricing or null pricing does is it sets up a slightly less attractive option, which makes its pair look far and disproportionately more attractive. And this is used often in business, as I say, as a way of getting certain outcomes. Double your price. So I mentioned the exercise at the beginning. Market experiments can be a great way of understanding, business problems. So, we know the power of things like A/B testing. We can try different alternatives out in the market, maybe with a small sample size, and then we can use that to drive, important decisions. So double your price. How does it work? Well, basically, is there a safe test, perhaps a ring-fenced experiment that you can run in your own market with your own customers to see what happens if you actually double your price? Now, companies have done this, and they tend to do it when they're entering a new market. So the example I gave you before was when entering the London market, when launching a new product. But I've also done this with companies by creating a parallel product. So taking an existing product, copying it, giving it a new name, a different set of identity, maybe a different color, different messages, and relaunching it at a much higher price. See what happens. This is basically a technique to try to increase your average transaction size. Maybe it isn't a double, but maybe it's a 30 or 40% increase. As I say, businesses are doing this, and every single company that's done this experiment has come back and said they learned something really interesting about their customer that they hadn't appreciated before. Now, if you're unable or unwilling to do the actual experiment, there is double your price light version, which is the thought experiment. Imagine you're selling your current product or service at twice the current price point. Take that scenario, sit down with your team, and discuss what must have happened in order for the scenario to be true. And this is just a great thought experiment because it forces your team and yourself to again, throw away some of that baggage and think, okay, think proactively, think new horizons. What must have happened? What have we done here? And of course, it forces the team to think about customer value. Again, it's about focusing on the customer and what's important to them, their decision-making landscape, and all the other things I've already talked about. So a really important and really valuable thing. Now, I won't talk through this list, but there are many, many other techniques and strategies that companies use in order to increase prices, essentially, or increase average transaction value, which is a slightly broader definition of price. The only one I'll mention from this list is the top one, because businesses do not do this enough. Think about the enhanced emotional value. Think about the water scattergram I showed you, all those different price points. It's about the way it looks, the branding, the packaging, the messaging that goes with it. How do you build more emotional value in your product or service? Because if you're able to do that, then the chances are you'll create more value and you can charge a higher price as well. So, and again, if you want to see more about these, they're all in the book. So what did we think we knew about pricing? So we said the pricing, is it just one of the 4 Ps of marketing? Actually, no, price is hugely important. Really is hugely important, but unfortunately widely underappreciated, not least because it enables that reinvestment and that virtuous circle to help you grow your business. We thought we knew price should be set relative to costs, but I hope we all know now that price should ideally be linked in some way to customer benefits. And we've talked about the importance of value-based pricing, but with appropriate reference to competitors and substitutes, always. And that competitive landscape is also important. We said, are people rational and considered decision makers? No, unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunate, I don't know. Humans are often not rational and usually far less rational than they think they are or that we think we are. And we talked about the influence of price points, framing, the reference and the environment within which they make decisions. And our challenge really is to find out, well, for each of our businesses, how do our customers judge value? And we've already said value is not the same as value for money. Value is far more important, usually, from a decision point of view. We talked about, is product value linked to functionality? Well, actually, a large portion of derived value today for customers is emotional. So remember the water scattergram, and as I say, remember that for your own businesses as well. And then lastly, business analysis and theory, so traditional ways of thinking, can provide the answers we need to build our businesses and go forward. But actually, I'm a big fan of market experimentation. So experiments such as the double your price, can provide step change insights. And that's what we want in our businesses, don't we? We don't want to grow at 3% a year. We want to grow 30, 50, 100% if we can, and if it's sustainable. Now, if you want to know more, fortunately, there's a book about this. So everything we've talked about today, or I've talked about today, is in the book. There's a QR code there if you want to read the Amazon reviews. Please do that as well. Published by FT Publishing just earlier this year, so it's a brand new book. And I've been really pleased by the feedback I've had, and from some of the people in the room here today as well. So that wraps it up. I've no idea how I did in time, but we have, I hope, time for questions. So we can, I think we've got the Slido bits and pieces there. There we go. So yes, great. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions in the audience?
We've just seen the book listed on Amazon, and I noticed it was at $18. Are you going to double your price? Or?
So the question was, at $18 on Amazon, am I going to double my price? Perhaps I already did double it. Thank you, though.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that was amazing. It really was good. I put the same thing. So when you're first bringing out a product that doesn't really exist, then you need to think about pricing, not based on competitors. So are you doing the analysis based on, because we had something recently, we put before this and said it wasn't realistic, the pricing, based on what?
Yeah, so a really interesting question. So the question was, if you're doing an innovative product, something that's never existed before, there are no reference points, how do you do it? Well, that's a really, I mean, innovation is a special case in many forms, in many ways for business, but that's an absolutely an opportunity to do value-based pricing. Because again, if you want people to buy it and you expect people to buy it, then what's in it for them? How do you construe and frame that value? In B2B, you can use money terms, usually, because you can think about changes in profitability and so on. But also think about the other elements I talked about, also for B2C, but also in B2B, this idea about, well, maybe it's about making it easier for them. Maybe it's about establishing different forms of value that aren't so tangible. So again, emotional value and so on. But it's definitely about looking at the customer. You're welcome.
We've got some questions online. How do you recommend setting prices when it's difficult to put a figure on estimating customer value?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it kind of goes back to what I was just saying. So if you can't estimate customer value in financial terms, and this is quite common in B2C, then think about this idea about people buy the product that they find most rewarding at a price that they can afford. So you can segment your market, think about different, how able or capable different strata of your customers are in terms of what they can afford. And then for each of those segments, think about, well, okay, how can I now maximize the derived value? What do they recognize in terms of value? And so by doing that and doing this analysis in different segments, you can say, well, okay, we've got more customers in this segment or that segment, or you can think about we've got a stronger proposition in one of those compared to the other. And that will give you a roadmap to move towards a cohesive and differentiated communication strategy about how you acquire those customers as well.
We've got another question. Should we state pricing in our company's websites?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So should you state pricing on your company website? I mean, I think it depends on what the norms are in your industry. So you always have to be, as I said, value-based pricing, but with appropriate reference to the competitive situation. So you have to look at what the norms are. But my preference is not to be overly transparent with pricing. Or if you are, let's say that you are forced to be absolutely, public in the public domain about pricing, then, recognize that some of your customers want to pay more. Recognize that some of your customers want opportunities to power up or we talk about on-sell or upsell some customers. Some customers want the opportunities, maybe they've got more budget available and they'd like a little bit extra and spend that extra budget. So don't think about pricing as being absolute. Think about it as being a reference point and a guide to what hopefully will be a bigger relationship that you have with your customers. So if you do have to do it, then think of it really as being something that's a starting point of a conversation rather than being absolute. Because if you're doing absolute, then unless everyone has a really high price and really big margins, then you risk falling into that trap that we talked about. Good question, thank you.
And this one I think is from one of your former students. Hi, Professor David, great to hear from you again. If you have a customer and at some point pricing is adjusted, what range in percentage terms increment would you take?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it depends on the specifics, really. So what are the norms, what's usual, what's acceptable? But I think fundamentally to answer that, it's about analysis and figuring out, where are you today and then where could you move? So you can think about that value diagram, but you can also think again about, well, maybe there are ways we can sit down and really help diagnose our customers' decision-making landscape and uncover ways that perhaps you can add that additional value. So I think it's an iterative thing. I don't think it's a single step. I think it's an iterative approach. But again, it fundamentally comes down to that, acquiring the intelligence around customer hierarchy, how they make trade-offs, and then how do you build that value within your delivery system. And the delivery system, of course, is your company.
Thank you. Does anybody have any more questions?
Hiya. Great talk, really enjoyed it, thank you. How much of this is relevant to public procurement systems where you're potentially tendering or there are incumbents in the market? I'm particularly thinking of health tech type products where if you can't show increased effectiveness but also a lower price, then you don't stand a chance of being purchased. Yeah,
great question. So tendering. So that you're tendering to a governmental, so you're placing tender. Yeah, tender-based businesses are sort of a special case, really. I think going back to that McKinsey study and also a lot of the tendering submission documents and looking behind the curtain to see how people are actually judging tendering, price clearly is an element, but it's trying to understand, well, okay, what other elements are in there and how do we accentuate those so that we can still get a decent price, we can make a living, we can survive, we can grow. But what are the other factors that we need to put in front of pricing that will be recognised more keenly than just the price number? If you tender in industries where it's purely on price, and price is 95% of it's around the price, you probably want to get out of that industry. Because it's tough to survive, isn't it? It's a race to the bottom otherwise.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. If if you'd like to thank me in...
Pleasure.
Join
Thank
me,
you.
sorry, in thanking Professor Falzani for a fascinating talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So what next? Well, if this has whetted your appetite for further events, we have our final event of the year, which is coming up on the 5th of December. That's entitled Cybersecurity, Why Me? I'm an SME. And we already have 20 businesses signed up for this. This is from one of our colleagues in computer science, who is going to be discussing why micro businesses and small businesses are still disproportionately affected by cyber attacks and things of that nature. And they'll also be utilising that as an opportunity to showcase some of the research they're going to be doing in 2024 around equipping SMEs to be much more resilient in terms of cyber security. We would also encourage all of you, if you haven't joined, I know some people are here as guests, if you'd like to join the network, it's free, because we looked at our value and pricing proposition and decided that it would be free. This will get you access to our monthly newsletter, and you'll join amongst 1,800 contacts who are the first to hear about programs and support options that the university has that we are specifically looking to work with businesses about. It will also give you the first chance on all of the network events that we're doing like this, and the opportunity to get a consultation with one of my colleagues to actually look at how the university can support your business, whether that's in terms of skills, technology, capacity, facilities, everything. So it really is something that we would recommend. You'll have heard a lot about things like lack of EU funding, ERDF closing. Universities are still open for business, and universities aren't just here to teach. We're here to look at research, innovation, how we can work with our local, regional and national businesses to support engagement, research and innovation. So, the last thing I have to do is to thank you all for attending in person. Thank you to everybody that was watching online and has submitted questions. If I could just ask you once again to thank Professor Falzani for the talk. We still have some catering left. Please take it with you if you don't want to eat it at the time. It's too good to go to waste. We have the room, I think, up until 6. But your feedback on these events really does matter to us. So if you do get a spare 5 minutes, and if you wouldn't mind scanning the QR code and letting us know your feedback on the event, if there's anything that you'd like to see more of, less of, if you'd like us to adjust our pricing, then that's the kind of feedback that we would like. We are at the stage now where we are planning our calendar for 2024. So if there's anything that you would like to see, if you would like the opportunity to deliver an elevator pitch at any one of our sessions, then please get in touch with myself or the team. If you're leaving us, then I wish you a safe trip back, but if not, the buffet is still available. Thank you very much.